For decades, Missouri's divisions had been political. In 1861, they became military. The arguments that had once played out through speeches, elections, and compromises were now backed by armed men, militia camps, and competing governments. By the spring of 1861, Missouri stood in an uneasy position. Officially, it remained in the Union. But beneath the surface, loyalties were fractured. Some Missourians believed their future lay with the South. Others believed the Union had to be preserved at all costs. And many simply hoped the state could avoid war altogether. That hope would not last long. In this episode, we begin Phase 2 of Missouri's Civil War. Missouri erupts, the fight for control of the state. Missouri entered 1861 deeply divided, but not neatly divided. This was not a simple North versus South situation. Communities, families, and political leaders often disagreed not just with each other, but internally. Governor Claiborne Fox Jackson leaned strongly toward the Southern cause. Many Missourians sympathized with secession or at least distrusted the growing power of the federal government. At the same time, Missouri also contained powerful Unionist sentiment. In St. Louis especially, Union support remained strong, reinforced in part by German immigrant communities who opposed secession and feared the spread of slavery. And caught between these competing pressures stood men like Sterling Price. Price initially hoped Missouri might avoid open conflict. But as tensions deepened, moderation became harder to maintain. That was one of the defining features of Missouri in 1861. Neutrality kept collapsing.
Follow us on TikTok. We post Missouri Civil War history every day, battles, people, and the stories most don't cover.
Missouri was not some distant frontier that either side could afford to ignore. Strategically, the state mattered enormously. The Mississippi River formed Missouri's eastern border. The Missouri River cut directly across the state. Railroads, river traffic, agriculture, manufacturing, and western migration routes all made Missouri critical to the future of the war. Control of Missouri meant access. Access to transportation. Access to manpower. Access to the West. And then there was St. Louis. The city contained one of the largest federal arsenals in the country. Thousands of weapons sat there at a moment when loyalties inside the state remained uncertain. Both Union and Confederate sympathizers understood the same thing. Whoever secured Missouri early would gain a major advantage. That realization pushed the state closer and closer to confrontation. As spring turned into summer in 1861, Missouri's political crisis became increasingly militarized. Militias organized. Weapons were gathered. Rumors spread constantly. Federal authorities in St. Louis feared that pro-secession forces might attempt to seize the arsenal. At the same time, many pro-Southern Missourians believed the federal government was preparing to impose military control over the state. Trust disappeared quickly. One of the key figures during this period was Captain Nathaniel Lyon. Lyon believed hesitation would be dangerous. He viewed Missouri as too important to risk losing through compromise or delay. That mindset would shape events dramatically in the months ahead. Meanwhile, Governor Jackson and other Southern sympathizers explored ways to strengthen Missouri's military position outside direct federal control. By May of 1861, both sides increasingly behaved as though conflict was inevitable. And once armed groups begin preparing for war, the line between preparation and action becomes very thin.
If this story feels unfinished, that's because it is. The Missouri in the Crossfire series goes deeper into the people, the decisions, and the chaos that reshaped Missouri during the Civil War. Find the full series at mostcivilwar.website/books.
What made Missouri different from many other states was that the conflict did not unfold cleanly. There was no single moment where the entire state moved together. Instead, Missouri fractured. Cities, counties, militias, political leaders, and civilians all reacted differently to the crisis. Some communities rallied behind the Union. Others openly supported the Southern cause. Some desperately tried to avoid choosing. But the pressure created over decades, through compromise, border conflict, political division, and competing loyalties, could no longer be contained. By the summer of 1861, Missouri was no longer debating war. It was entering it. And from the beginning, Missouri's Civil War showed signs that it would be different. This would not simply be a struggle between massive armies meeting on distant battlefields. The war in Missouri would involve rivers, railroads, towns, farms, partisan fighters, divided loyalties, and civilians caught in the middle. It would become a conflict where politics, military action, and personal revenge often blurred together. The warning signs of that future had already appeared during Bleeding Kansas. Now those tensions were spreading across Missouri itself.
For deeper context, primary sources, and battlefield guides tied to this episode, visit moscivilwar.website. It's a growing archive of Missouri's Civil War, battles, people, and places, all in one place.
Phase 2 marks the moment when Missouri's long political crisis becomes open conflict. The compromises had failed. Neutrality was collapsing. An armed force was beginning to replace negotiation. The question was no longer whether Missouri would become part of the war. The question was who would control it. In our next episode, the crisis turns into open confrontation. We'll follow Missouri through the Camp Jackson affair, the collapse of negotiations in St. Louis, the Union seizure of Jefferson City, and the first major clashes at Boonville, Cole Camp, and Carthage. What began as tension and preparation now becomes movement, violence, and war. This is Missouri in the crossfire. And Missouri is erupting.